The next session is Kama, the Riddle of Desire. We now invite eminent author, public intellectual and marketing guru Gurcharan onto the stage. He will speak about his new book, Kama, the Result of Desire, the Riddle of Desire. We also request Seema Anand to please come to the dais. Dr. Seema Anand is a London-based mythologist and a storyteller. She lectures on the Kama Sutra and is author of The Art of Seduction. The dialogue promises to throw up philosophical, historical, and literary ideas on love, all close to Khushwant Singh's heart.
Thank you. I'm going to actually start by saying that, and I'm going to start by talking standing up just for this moment. So, ancient India abounds in books on karma. Every single king that came to the throne actually commissioned one of these books because it was believed that really, really good sex meant that the marriage would be stable. If the marriage was stable, society would be stable. And if society was stable, the kingdom would be stable. And so, ladies and gentlemen, in the name of national security, we're going to run this session. So, very interestingly, we have a little twilight zone in India that we work with sexual attitudes. 325 AD was when the first ecumenical council of the Catholic Church was set up. And as soon as they set up, they started to talk about how bad sex was. Sex was sinful, pleasure was sinful, it was the road to hell. At the very same time, 300 and something AD, across the oceans, Vatsyayan is sitting on the banks of the river Ganges, and he is writing the Kama Sutra, talking about how wonderful pleasure is, how divine pleasure is, and it is the road to heaven. And somehow over 2,000 years, we have ended up with both these strands right here in India. And we, as the Indians, exist in this twilight zone between these two strands with our sexual attitudes. Between the missionary school teachings and the Kama Sutra subconscious. And so the more books that we have on the subject, the better it is for us. And therefore, I am absolutely delighted to introduce you all to the very newest book on the subject, Kama, the Riddle of Desire, and the great man himself, Gurcharan who wrote it. Now, I'm going to actually start you off with something, because I said to Gurcharan, I said, I want to introduce you with something that nobody knows about you. Can you tell me one of those things? And he gave me a story that actually made me fall in love with him. And so I'm going to actually ask Gurcharan himself to share that story with us, because I think it comes from him better.
Well, at 12:35 p.m. on September the 6th, the Supreme Court decriminalized homosexuality. It was one of a number of liberal decisions that have been made on the emotional life in the last 2 months. And it was essentially, the reality is, my son is gay. And he has had a partner with whom he has lived happily for 15 years. But my wife and I couldn't talk about it in public because we were afraid. And everybody has enemies, and we did not want to get him into any kind of trouble. But a great burden was lifted from both my wife and my shoulders at that time. And so I say to you, it's not just this, but it's the decriminalization of adultery. It is the law on privacy. It is the allowing entry of women into temples. I think if we put it all together, we would say that if in 1947 we got our political freedom, and in 1991 we got our economic freedom with the liberalization of the economy, then in September 2018, we've got our emotional freedom as a nation.
And here's to emotional freedom. I think emotional maturity is what is going to make our nation. Was this one of the factors, Gurcharan, in actually writing this book?
Well, you know, I write my books really about things that trouble me. And if you are an Indian, poverty has to trouble you. And so when I quit the corporate world and became a full-time writer, came back and settled in India, and Frank, the idea of how to make a poor country rich was an obsession. And I began with these columns in the Times of India, which now appear in 7 other languages. And so that book really became the India Unbound. And India Unbound deals with the classical goal of artha, which means material well-being. As one of the sources of happiness is that. Then I was bothered a few years later that while India was rising economically, corruption bothered me. And so I wrote the book, The Difficulty of Being Good, which was about Dharma, another goal of life. So it was logical. Karma was logical, because actually karma is the one that had bothered me the most of all the 3 things. And so I think it's a natural, it's really a natural fact, something that bothers us all. And the fact that we sweep it under the carpet. We talk happily about our economic lives, our political lives, but this one we sweep under the carpet. And so I think it's time. It's time to talk about openly, because a nation, a healthy nation, also has a healthy emotional life.
Definitely. I think, for a country that we say doesn't talk about sex, we talk a lot about sex. This year, I'm told that 60% of the books that have come out have actually been on some or the other form of karma. So I think we're moving ahead quite happily. So tell me, the underlying vein of your book is this twilight zone of different complexes that we exist with.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, just like the previous book, The Difficulty of Being Good, it was driven by dilemmas, by conflicts that are not easy. In fact, the Mahabharata says that at the heart of life is the melancholic human condition. And by that he meant, by the Mahabharata means that sometimes there are no answers. So really at the heart of this book is a moment when the narrator, there's a fictional narrator who stops the story and then talks about what he thinks is happening to his life. He is facing a dilemma. He's in his mid-40s and he's spent his life slogging, rising in the world, in his company, climbing ladders. He's slogged at home, raising his children, and suddenly the desire in his life wanes. And actually the flowers on this book are the stages of desire in the human life. We can come back to that. But that's the god Kama, by the way. The Kama is we one of the only cultures that elevated Kama to a goal of life, and we created a god, and the god has arrows, and these arrows are these flowers that he shoots. Anyway, coming back to this dilemma, Seema, he finds the desire has waned from his life, desire for his wife. He loves his family, he loves his wife. And a week later, he finds himself on the Deccan Queen. And those of you who know the Indian Railways, that's the train that goes from Bombay, VT, to Pune. And she's a beautiful woman. And she sits close by and they get to chatting. And soon it becomes clear that they are attracted to each other. And by the end of the journey, their conversation has become intimate. And it's quite clear that there might be an affair in the making. And so he asks, he wonders, should he go ahead and have this affair? And this is what goes through his mind. He says if he has an affair, he will devastate his marriage. He will hurt the person he loves the most, his wife. He'll hurt his children. And then he thinks, there's somebody who is telephoning in front of me and it's making it difficult to...
Sorry, sir. Could we... Excuse me. Sorry, sir. Sorry. It's... Thank you.
So he says, well, maybe we could keep the affair a secret. But then he thinks that if he does that, he'll have to lie. And if he lies, more lies will have to be piled upon more lies. Till a point when he will become inauthentic. And so he wonders, maybe then he should not have the affair. But what would be the consequence of not having an affair? Well, the fact is he fears that he will remain discontented. He might end up as a shriveled, old, mean, discontented man.
Never having tasted the pleasures of life.
Well, having missed a great opportunity, his sort of last opportunity for a certain
like a
kind of thrilling happiness. And so, I think what this story brings out is a classical dilemma between Dharma and Karma. We are constantly reminded in our lives that we owe duty to others, but we are never reminded that we also have a duty to ourselves. So duty, it's very clear to him that, he has thought this through, that yes, he loves his family, he loves his wife, but he's also aware of what we would call restraint. And so I think this is a situation which many of us have faced in our lives, and it is really what the Mahabharata calls the melancholic human condition, that there is no answer to a dilemma like this. Each of us has to figure it out ourselves. Either we betray the other person, we betray, in his case, his wife, or do I betray myself?
It's great. I like this new India where we talk about going ahead with karma as a duty to yourself. I like this. Okay, so Gurcharan has dealt with this dilemma philosophically, and he's looked at the philosophies of both the Western and the Eastern world. And the Western world is Proust and Nietzsche and Tolstoy, and it's, oh my God, it's so heavy and grim and miserable. And then, of course, there is the philosophy of ancient India. There is the ancient literatures, which are just joyous and fabulous. And I like the way the ancient Indians thought about sex and sexuality and pleasure. It really is. So, as somebody who deals with the subject, I'm going to focus on the Indian philosophies, because I do like those better. Now I have to start you off by saying that according to the filmatologists, filmatology, ladies and gentlemen, is the study of kissing. Okay, it is actually an academic study. It is a PhD study. So if you think that you have spent time thinking about kissing, other people have spent far more. It's all right to do so. And according to the filmatologists, the very first kiss mentioned in literature is in the Mahabharata. And apparently, the kiss was exported from India by Alexander the Great to the Western world. We started it all, apparently. And so please tell me, because I know that you spent a lot of time researching the Mahabharata and taking from that. Tell us what you have to say about the Mahabharata.
Well, before even we go to the Mahabharata, we really have to realize that in the Western tradition, the Christian tradition, in the beginning was light. God said in Genesis, let there be light. In the Rig Veda, in the beginning was karma, desire, and the cosmos was created from the seed of desire in the mind of the one. And so the book asks the question, what does it say about a civilization where in the beginning was desire? And not only does it say that, but the ancients who were thinking about these subjects, they felt that desire is the source of all action. You wouldn't wake up in the morning if you didn't feel desire. It's the source of creation. It's the source of procreation. And so they elevated it to a goal of life. And they created a god also named Karma. And by the way, I think we would all of us do ourselves a favor if from tomorrow we change the name of Valentine's Day to Kama Deva Divas and take the steam out of the Hindu rite and the Hindutvas who go around and the Romeo squads who go around terrorizing young people. And while I'm talking about the god of karma, one of the wisdom that the tradition had was, and the wisdom really in fact begins with the Arthashastra, I mean the Kama Sutra, because most of us think Kama Sutra is a book of sexual positions. Well, it's actually a book of manners, good manners. It says, for example, that don't talk about yourself. Talk about her when you meet her. Don't talk in Sanskrit. Talk in Prakrit, her language, the language of the people. Don't try to sound like a show-off. And it says, and one of the things it does also say, which is really one of the riddles which comes through. By the way, it talked about kissing. Let me say what Kama Sutra says about kissing. Kama Sutra says, if you are kissed, kiss back. And so what I was trying to say...
And with the other several permutations in the most delightfully refined way.
Exactly. and so one of the things that the advice that the hero of this book is a fellow called Amar, and who's faced this dilemma that I've just talked to you about. Kama Sutra says that, all men look at they see a beautiful woman and they're attracted to her. And all women, they see a handsome man and they feel attracted to him. But after some consideration, the matter goes no further. Now, what a charming way to describe civilized living.
And sexual attraction as it should be.
And
just a normal, natural chemistry that happens.
And so, to come back to the cover of this book, so here is the first flower. Yes. So here is the first flower where the two people meet. and there's fascination. Then when they decide to act, that is the Ashoka flower. And that is when they decide to do something about it. And this is the jasmine flower, which is the third stage of love, where there is intimacy. It could be marriage, it could be a live-in relationship or whatever. And then inevitably, as in the story of Amar, over time you have children and hard work. In fact, I'm convinced that the difficulty of bringing up a human child is part of the compensation for the extreme pleasure that we get from sex. And in fact,
payback time.
And in fact, yes, and not only the bringing up the children, but essentially the human condition. And I have another story, but we will not be able to get time to it. But there's a lovely story from one of the Vedic, in the Atharva Veda, about the loneliness of the human condition. We are born alone, we are going to die alone. And I think that the pleasure of sex is a remuneration for that loneliness of the human condition.
That's what I think I love about the ancient Indian texts, is that sex is supposed to be pleasurable and joyous and happy and fabulous, rather than this repressed, miserable, sinful thing.
And so, exactly right. That, we were talking about Christian West. Actually, it's original sin. Desire is original sin. It is guilt and shame. But coming back here to our culture, because we too, it's a natural thing, we too have a problem. So after years of intimacy, desire begins to fade. And that's the flower that the god Kama shoots at the couple after, say, 20 years of marriage or whatever. And so what the wisdom of the ancients was that each stage, that desire and love, change at each stage of one's life. And you need resources, you need education to cope with the different stages of love so that it doesn't die. This last is a sandalwood flower, which is the death of love. And there's another story associated with that. But the point, I think, here is that our wisdom is somewhat different from today's. An American young man comes home from work one day and he says to his wife, "Honey, I've fallen out of love with you. Let's have a divorce." Well, what the classical wisdom of ours is saying that, look, love changes at every stage of life. And you require the training, the resources, and it's a question of working to maintain that through the...
Now, isn't that amazing wisdom? That's really worth knowing, I think. I think it's amazing. But you were going to tell us one of your fabulous stories of pleasure from the Mahabharata.
Yes, I'm sorry. But the Mahabharata, it's a very ironic thing, the way we are prudish about the way. And there are 40 pages of the Mahabharata dealing with karma. And one of the stories is about two characters. And one of them asks the other, who gets more pleasure from sex, men or women?
Should we just see? Ladies and gentlemen, take a poll. Men? Okay, women?
Okay, here's what the Mahabharata says. So, the other fellow who's supposed to answer the question says, well, you can't tell unless you've lived your life both as a man and a woman. So he tells him the story of King Bhangashvana. This king lived half his life as a man and the other half of his life as a woman. And because he was a good human being, he is given a boon at the end of his life that now you can choose your next life. Would you like to be born as a man or as a woman? And he, without thinking, says immediately, as a woman, of course. And the other fellow says, are you crazy? You could be emperor, powerful, as a king, and you choose to be a woman? Why? Because he says that I have experienced both lives. And he says that only a woman truly understands the value of karma, value of emotion, and truly the pleasure that she gets from sex is far greater than a man gets.
Hashtag me too. Okay, I think that's amazing. So I absolutely agree, and this is one of the things that makes our ancient literature great, just the level of understanding and knowledge and wisdom. There's another text that you've quoted, which is the Kumara Sambhavam by Kalidas. Now, for those of you who haven't come across this particular book, it is possibly the most erotic text ever written. I know that you say that the language that is used now in today's terms is very tame compared to the kind of erotica that's written, but in my mind, it will remain the most erotic book in the world, because I read it and I still go short of breath. It's really fabulous. I think you're going to talk a little bit about that for us.
Well, yes, I think the two texts that loom large over this book, Proust, the important text, because the narrator feels jealous. And Proust is the greatest writer on jealousy. But the two Indian texts that loom large is the Gita-Govinda of Jayadev, which is perhaps one of the greatest texts of romantic love. And the amazing thing about it is that you don't know whether it's a love of Radha and Krishna. And before I say that, let me also add, Seema, that it is very odd that romantic love was discovered in human history at the same time. In the 12th century, in the West, it was expressed in the greatest text of romantic love, the story of Tristan and Isolde. In the Islamic world, it was expressed in the story of Laila and Majnu, in Nizami, those of you who know Persian. And in India, in Eastern India, it was expressed as the story of Radha and Krishna. And what makes Radha and Krishna's love so what makes this text, because today, Chaitanya and after all the mystics, the Bhakti saints will tell us that it's a yearning of the soul for the divine. Well, that's sort of the tame version. The real version of Jayadev is the fact that it is the love not only of the human soul for the divine, but it's the love of God for one person, not all the world. And she happens to be married. Radha is married. So it's an adulterous love of a god for a woman. But to come to Kumara Sambhava, actually, if you do want to explore this further, I would say read Heifetz's translation of the Gita-Govinda. It's written by a poet and a Sanskritist. And of course, Kalidasa's version, the translation of Kumara Sambhava, I would read Baba Stroller Miller's.
Yes, the Clay Sanskrit Library version, yes.
So, what makes why you are so thrilled by reading this is Kalidasa, one of our great poets, and fact is that this is 99% of love poetry is about illicit love. This is that 1%, and it's conjugal love. It's a love of Shiva and Parvati, and they are our parents of us all. And in the 8th canto, which I sort of deconstruct in my book, is the canto which even the medieval poets of India were very shy to translate or talk about, because it is very explicit love-making of Shiva and Parvati. It makes Lady Chatterley's lover look very tame indeed. But it is very high-quality poetry. I mean, explicit love between gods, written in the most tasteful way imaginable, in the most erotic way imaginable, and it being conjugal love really is rather
quite
amazing.
Special indeed. So I know that as we come to an end of this session, and appropriately so, fittingly so, because I'm going to leave you all waiting to find out exactly what was going to happen, because it is truly very, very beautifully written. You know, I mean, I think that what's so special is that there's nothing explicit over there. It's just the way that it's. So we're not going to go any further on this. But I just want to say that was absolutely amazing. I know that everybody over here is fascinated and they can't wait to run into that bookshop and buy a copy of Gurcharan's book and read all about. And he has done translated lots of bits of the 8th canto of the Kumar Sambhavam. So if for nothing else, I would like you to go and read that and enjoy it. And ladies and gentlemen, welcome to New India, emotional independence, and a life of erotic pursuit in defense of the nation.
And also read this book to find out whether he has the affair or not, what actually happens, because it's a roman à clef, and so it's one of the things. Just to say one thing quickly is that, you know, the ancients, not only the ancients but also Freud, saw desire as a cosmic force. And I think the Indian civilization saw the question they raised very early on, and the question Freud also raised is that how could this cosmic force that gave birth to the cosmos, to give birth to the universe, also be a force of human love, this intimate love? And what is the connection? And the connection, the literature tells us, is the Sanskrit word tapas. That the cosmos is created from tapas. The yogi's meditation, Shiva's 1,000-year meditation, is about the heat that the yogi generates. Only in his case, the yogi's case, the semen rises upwards. And it is also the pleasure. In other words, that same tapas is the heat of sexual love. And so they make a connection between the fact that animals basically mostly they don't have imaginations, and so they're quite happy. Polygamy is quite the norm. But in the human case, there's a story in the Mahabharata also how polygamy was the norm. But here, in this case, how did it happen that the human being who was quite polygamous, and history shows us, evolutionary biology shows us, we were polygamous, that how did we actually then end up with monogamy? And And how is it that all the free love movements that have taken place in history, right from 2nd century BC, there have been free love. And the latest was in the 60s, 70s, but also in the 1980s, polyamory, and it hasn't succeeded. So where does human beings sort of end up? And I think it's the human ability, first, the imagination, and second, the fantasy that we create around one person. Now society uses that charming human inclination to create marriage, etc. Because one of the things I talk about is that the history of karma is a history of a clash between karma optimists and karma pessimists. Karma optimists were the ones who raised it to the goal of life, and they had a god called karma. But we blame the Victorians for becoming prudish, but actually, right from the beginning, we have had karma pessimists. Our yogis, our rishis, the Buddha, the Jains. I mean, these people, for them, karma was a serious problem. And so what there was at some point in this clash between karma optimists and karma pessimists was karma realism, which is essentially what is enacted in the Dharma Shastras, which is that sex is okay as long as it's within marriage. And every society comes to that conclusion.
Absolutely. So just to finish, what does happen is that we are the only culture in the world where Kamdev, Cupid, the god of love and desire, doesn't actually exist physically. You know, right at the beginning of our mythology, Shivji opens up his third eye, he incinerates Kamdev. So Kamdev exists in the mind, and I think maybe that's why, because it's in the mind, it's not a physical limitation, maybe that's why we're able to think so vastly and widely about love in all its forms. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, a great big round of applause, please, for our author, Gurcharan Das, and his fabulous book, Kama, The Riddle of Desire.
And in celebration of our emotional liberation that we have had, we're living in historic times, let us have a movement, and not only a Me Too movement, but let's have a movement where we change Valentine's Day to Kama Deva Divas.